My family kicked me out at 18 and erased me from the will, but when I inherited a fortune from my great aunt, they all came back begging and my stepdad showed up at my door demanding $50,000. Now he has a restraining order. I'm 26 years old, I work in finance, and until like 2 years ago, I basically didn't exist to my family. I mean, they literally treated me like I was invisible or a burden in my own house. But now, ever since I inherited a fortune from my great Aunt Rose, suddenly everyone wants me, everyone needs me, everyone acts like the last few years never happened. And honestly, I need to tell this story because I still have trouble processing how I got here. From being the forgotten son to having to file a restraining order against my own stepfather. I guess I should start at the beginning. My dad died when I was 7, completely unexpected heart attack, like the man was 35 and healthy, or so we thought. I don't remember much from that period. Honestly, just fragments, like when Mom cried in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, or when I had to wear my dad's suit to the funeral because it was the only black thing we had. The years after that were just Mom and me, and we weren't rich, but we were. Okay. You know, she worked in administration at a hospital and I went to school. We made dinners together, watched movies on Fridays. It was simple, but it was good. Or at least I thought so. Everything changed when I turned 14. Mom met Paul at, I don't know, some work event or something. It was never clear to me. The guy worked in construction. He was like 42 at the time, I think. And he came with a complete package. His son, Blake, who was 17. From the beginning, I knew something wasn't right. Like the first time Paul came to dinner at the house, he looked at me like he was evaluating me, like he was calculating how much of a problem I was going to be for him. Blake didn't even talk to me. He just sat there with his phone the whole time. And when Mom asked him something about school, he basically grunted an answer. But Mom was radiant, completely in love, and I didn't want to ruin her happiness after all those years of seeing her sad, so I didn't say anything. They got married like 6 months later. The wedding was small, in the backyard of the house, and I remember Paul gave me a pat on the shoulder and said something like, "Now we're a real family." And I just thought, what were we before then? But whatever. I was 14. What did I know? Blake and Paul officially moved into our house, which suddenly felt much smaller. Blake was a total mess, left his stuff everywhere, never cleaned anything, and had this attitude that the world owed him everything. And the worst part is that Paul enabled him completely. Like Blake could do whatever and Paul would just say, "He's just a teenager. He'll mature eventually." Things started getting worse gradually. Blake started messing with my stuff. At first, small things, like he'd use my video games without asking permission, eat my school lunch that Mom made for me. But then it escalated. One day I came home from school and my headphones, ones that had taken me like 3 months to save up for with my lawn mowing money, were in pieces on my bed. Completely destroyed, like someone had stepped on them or something. When I told Mom and Paul, Blake said I had left them on the floor and he'd stepped on them by accident. Total lie. I always kept them on my desk. But Paul looked at me and said, "Well, you should be more careful with your things." And that was it. Mom didn't even say anything, just looked away. That was the first moment. I really felt something was terribly wrong, but I still didn't understand how bad it was going to get. When I was like 15, Mom and Paul announced they were having a baby. Mom was super excited, crying with happiness and everything, and Paul acted like he'd won the lottery. Blake seemed not to care much. I didn't know what to feel. Honestly, like on one hand I thought maybe a baby would unite the family. But on the other hand, I already felt like I was being displaced, and a baby would only make it worse. And I was right. Daniel was born like 9 months later, a completely healthy baby. And from the second he came home, I officially became furniture. A month after Daniel arrived, Paul told me they needed my room for the nursery. My room, where I'd lived since we were kids, where all my stuff was, my memories, the only space that felt mine. They told me I'd move to the guest room, which was basically a closet with a window, like a twin bed and a small desk would fit, and that's it. When I tried to protest, Paul said, "The baby needs space. You're almost an adult. You don't need that much." And Mom just nodded and said, "It's just temporary, Matthew. We'll find a solution." Spoiler alert, They never found any solution. I moved into that tiny room, and Daniel kept my bedroom, the bedroom that had been mine for years. The next 2 years were basically a slow hell. I focused on school because it was the only thing I could control. I joined every club I could: debate, student newspaper, chess club, whatever, to not have to be at home. I got a part-time job at a coffee shop near school, worked after classes, and on weekends, I saved every penny I earned, because I already knew. Already at that point, I knew I needed to get out of there. My school counselor, Mr. Jacobs, would tell me, "Matthew, you have potential to go to a good college. Think big." And I'd think, sure. If I managed to survive until graduation, Blake kept being a disaster. By the time I was 17 and he was like 20, the guy still lived at home. Didn't work, didn't study, just played video games all day and went out with his friends at night. And Paul kept defending him, saying he was finding his path or some garbage like that. Meanwhile, I was working, studying, maintaining a 3.8 gigapascals, and nobody said anything. It was like everything I did was expected, invisible. But Blake could literally do nothing, and it was fine. There was a moment that really broke me. I think it was like 2 months before I turned 18. It was a Saturday. I'd worked a double shift at the coffee shop because I needed the extra money, got home around 9 at night dead tired, and the house was empty. They hadn't even invited me, hadn't even let me know, just left. And it wasn't the first time. Like, this happened often. But that day, something in me broke. I sat there in the empty kitchen, eating cold pasta straight from the container, and thought, I need to get out of here, or I'm going to lose my mind. Things came to a breaking point like a month after that. Blake decided to throw a party while Mom and Paul were away for the weekend, visiting Paul's family. I wasn't invited, obviously, so I went to stay at my friend Tyler's. When I came back Sunday afternoon, my room, my tiny closet room, was trashed. There were beer cans everywhere. Someone had thrown up on my rug. My books were thrown on the floor, some wet, with I don't know what liquid. I went straight to Blake and yelled at him. Basically, it was the first time I really stood up for myself, told him he was an irresponsible mess and needed to clean my room immediately. He just laughed and said, "Relax, bro, it was just a party." When Mom and Paul got home that night, I showed them the mess. I expected finally, they'd hold him accountable. Paul looked at the room, looked at Blake, and then looked at me and said, "Well, help him clean it up. It was your party too, wasn't it?" I almost exploded. I told him I wasn't even there, that I had proof because I'd been at Tyler's house all weekend. Blake made up some story about how some of my friends had come over. Total lie, because all my friends knew I didn't throw parties. But Paul believed him, or pretended to believe him. And Mom just said, "Well, you both can clean it together, and that's that." That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I turned 18 like 2 months later. I'd been saving for 2.5 years, working every hour I could. On my birthday, there wasn't even cake. Like, Mom said something about being tired from work and that we'd celebrate another day, which never happened. That night, after a silent and awkward dinner where everyone except me celebrated that Blake had finally gotten a job interview that he surely wasn't going to get, I announced I was moving out. Paul literally laughed in my face. He said something like, "With what money, Matthew? With your coffee shop salary? Good luck paying rent in this city." And I took out my bank statement and put it on the table, showing I had like $8,000 saved, enough for deposit, first month's rent, and basic furniture. Paul's face changed completely, like went from mocking to almost angry. Mom just looked sad but didn't say anything to stop me. Didn't ask me to stay. Nothing. I moved out 2 weeks later. I found a small apartment like 20 minutes from my future college, a tiny studio, but it was mine, completely mine. The day I left, I packed all my stuff in my old 2008 Honda Civic that I'd bought with my own money. Blake didn't even come down to say goodbye. Paul gave me a cold handshake and said something about how I'd come crawling back in a few months. And Mom hugged me and cried, but still didn't say anything to defend me or ask me to reconsider. I left that house and honestly felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. The next few months were hard but good. I worked, studied, supported myself. Mom called me occasionally. awkward conversations where she told me about Daniel, and I tried not to mention how I felt abandoned. I didn't talk to Paul at all, and Blake had blocked me on everything after I left, probably because he no longer had anyone to bother at home. Life was simple, like I had 2 jobs to be able to pay for everything. Basically didn't sleep, but it was my life, and that mattered. Here's where the story gets really crazy. Like 6 months after moving out, I got a call from Mom. Weird conversation from the start. Like she sounded uncomfortable. Turns out Paul had updated his will. And Mom felt she should tell me that Paul had left everything. The house, his savings, his retirement accounts, everything divided between Blake and Daniel. I wasn't included at all. She literally called to inform me that, officially, I wasn't considered part of the family, even in legal terms. I don't know what she expected me to say. Like I cried a bit after hanging up because it still hurt, but honestly, I wasn't surprised. It just confirmed what I already knew, that to Paul I never mattered, and Mom allowed it. But then, like 4 months after that call, I got a letter from a law firm, Halper and Associates, a name I didn't recognize. The letter said they needed to meet with me about my great-aunt Rose's estate. I barely remembered Aunt Rose, like I'd seen her maybe 3 times in my life. She was my biological dad's aunt and lived in another state. I thought maybe she'd died and they wanted to inform me, so I made an appointment. I went to the lawyer's office. Miss Halper, a woman like 60 years old with glasses and a kind smile. She sat me down and explained that Aunt Rose had passed away 3 months earlier at 87. And then she said something that honestly, I thought I'd heard wrong. She said, "Your Aunt Rose has left you her complete estate, Mr. Matthew," which includes her house, 47 acres of land, and approximately $3.2 million in various accounts and trust funds. I sat there like an idiot, like literally with my mouth open, because it couldn't be real. $3.2 million. MS. Halper showed me all the documents. Everything was legitimate. Everything was mine. Turns out, Aunt Rose had been following my life more than I knew. After Dad died, she kept in touch with Mom occasionally, and apparently Mom had told her about my situation, about how I'd moved out on my own, about how I was working and studying. Aunt Rose didn't have children of her own, and apparently decided I was the only family member who deserved her money. The will specifically said she'd seen my determination and my character, and wanted to make sure I had the opportunities I deserved. I honestly almost cried right there in the lawyer's office. The next few months were a whirlwind of paperwork, taxes, bank transfers. MS. Halper helped me with everything, connected me with a good financial advisor, explained how to handle this kind of money. I bought Aunt Rose's house, a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood like 40 minutes from where I was. I didn't tell anyone in my family about the inheritance, like MS. Halper advised me to keep it private until everything was legally finalized, and I agreed. I kept working, stayed in school, but now with the security of knowing my future was assured, and then everything went to hell. I don't know how they found out. To this day, I'm not completely sure, but like 2 months after receiving the inheritance, Mom called me. And by the tone of her voice, I knew immediately she knew something. She asked me directly if it was true. I'd inherited money from Aunt Rose, and I'm not one to lie, so I told her yes. She was quiet for a moment, and then started with, "Oh, Matthew, that's wonderful. The family is so happy for you. We should celebrate." The family. The same family that had kicked me out, that had ignored me, that had removed me from a will. It made me feel sick. The calls started after that. First Mom, calling like every 2 days, making casual conversation, but always ending with something about how things were financially difficult, how Daniel needed things, how it would be nice if I could help my little brother. Then Blake started texting me. The guy who'd blocked me for years suddenly acting like we were best friends. "Hey bro, it's been a while since we talked. We should hang out." And Paul had the nerve to call me directly and say he needed a loan of $50,000 to expand his construction business, that it was a safe investment, that he'd pay me back with interest. $50,000. From the man who'd treated me like garbage for years. I told them all, no. I explained, as calmly as I could, that the money was for my future, for my education, for my life, and things got ugly. Blake sent me a message calling me selfish, saying family helps each other. Like the same brother who destroyed my stuff and made my life impossible now talking about family values. Mom started sending text messages full of guilt trips, reminding me of everything she'd done for me as a child, as if that erased years of pushing me aside. I changed my number, but somehow they got the new one. The breaking point came like 3 months later. I was at my house, the house I inherited, on a Saturday morning. The doorbell rings, and when I open it, it's Paul. He has Daniel with him. Daniel, who by then was like 3 years old. A small child, completely innocent in all this. Paul basically pushes his way inside my house, puts Daniel on my couch, and starts yelling at me. He says I'm an ungrateful son, that Mom raised me alone and I owe her everything, that Blake is my brother and I should help him, that Daniel is my brother too and deserved better than having a selfish brother. He's yelling so loud that Daniel starts crying, and I just see this scared little kid, and it makes me so angry that Paul would use him like that. I tell Paul to leave, to get out of my house immediately. He refuses, keeps yelling, saying he's not leaving without a check, that I deserve this for turning my back on my family. I end up having to call the police. The police arrive, take Paul out, he's still yelling threats as they take him away. They didn't arrest him because he hadn't been violent technically, just disturbing the peace, but they suggested I get a restraining order if I felt it was necessary. And I did. I went to court the next week and got a no-contact order against Paul for harassment and for showing up uninvited at my private property. After that, I took more serious measures. I changed my number again, and this time only gave it to close friends and the college. I blocked Mom, Paul, and Blake on absolutely everything, social media, email, everything, miss. Halper helped me set up an LLC to handle some of my financial affairs. So my name wasn't directly on public documents. I basically made myself as hard to find as possible. Mom made one last attempt. She sent me a physical letter, long, full of guilt and manipulation, talking about how she was my mother and deserved respect, how I was ruining the family, how someday I'd regret cutting contact with my little brother Daniel. And that letter, honestly, was what sealed everything for me, because at no point did she apologize. At no point did she acknowledge how I'd been treated, how she'd allowed me to be treated. It was all about what I owed them. I responded through Myas. Halper, a formal cease and desist letter, basically telling her any additional contact would be considered harassment and I'd take legal action. It's been like 2 years since all that. I'm 26 now. Finished my degree in finance, have an amazing job at a good firm. I live in the house I inherited from Aunt Rose, and it's beautiful, peaceful, mine. I have good friends, people who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. I haven't spoken to Mom, Paul, or Blake since then. Sometimes I feel bad for Daniel. Like he's not at fault for any of this. He's just a kid. I've thought maybe when he's older, when he's an adult and can make his own decisions about who he wants to have contact with, maybe I'll reach out to him. But that's something for the future. Do I regret cutting contact? No, honestly not. I spent years feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was invisible, like I didn't matter, and I finally understood the problem was never me. The problem was a family that only valued what they could get from me, not who I was as a person. Aunt Rose's inheritance didn't just give me financial security, it gave me the freedom to walk away from toxic people without worrying about surviving. Sometimes I wonder how they are. I know from the Facebook of some distant cousins that Blake finally got a job, though I don't know doing what. I know Mom and Paul are still together, that Daniel is growing up, and a very small part of me feels something. I don't know if it's pity or residual sadness, but most of me is at peace. I've built a good life, a life I chose, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. Last week I was cleaning the attic of the house and found an old box with photos from when Dad was alive, photos of Mom and me before everything got complicated. I sat there looking at them for a while, remembering how things used to be, and I felt sad about what was lost. But I also felt grateful for where I am now. Aunt Rose, someone I barely knew, gave me an opportunity my own mother couldn't or wouldn't give me. She gave me the chance to choose my own family, my own life, my own terms, and that's worth more than any amount of money.